Let's go, baby! Just got some shopping done.
Got the greens.
When you're going to visit a large collection of reptiles, you need to make sure you have some greens. Hi guys, welcome back to Just Turtles. I am here with a very exclusive interview today with Phil Lietz out in Colorado. Now he owns a Uromastyx mostly business, reptile business called Arids Only. It's an incredible company. Check out their website. He also runs the Project Herpetoculture podcast, which is part of the Animals at Home network, a wonderful group of podcasts. I was on the Animals at Home podcast several years ago now. Maybe dating myself a little bit because it was one of the early episodes. But anyway, I'm also here fittingly wearing my South Africa tortoise conservation shirt. Check them out as well. Dirk is doing amazing work in South Africa. And today we're going to be looking at a few tortoise species that live here, in addition to some of the awesome lizard species that live here at Arids Only. They're not necessarily South African tortoises, but they are some African tortoise species. So I'm really excited to show it all to you. I'm super excited to be here today and grateful for the opportunity. And I hope you like it. I know you'll like it. So we're here obviously in the middle of the move and checking a bunch of things out. I had to come in here, of course. I'd be remiss if I didn't come and spend some time with some tortoise species. So right now I'm checking out the Moroccan Greek tortoises, or Moroccan spur-thighed tortoise, Testuta graica maroccanensis. Yeah, okay. Anyway, ask Chris Leone if you want to know more about these Greek tortoises. But what's really cool about these ones, they're kind of a mid-sized tortoise. What's really cool about them is that as babies, they're the only Greek tortoise that doesn't have a spot on each individual scute on the carapace. They just kind of have more of a uniform tan color, which is really cool. So they're great species. That is another arid loving species. So here at Arids Only, it really makes sense for these tortoises to be here. And these are all captive bred, and they're doing really well, as you can see. Look at this little cutie. Oh my gosh, I love you. I wish there was any way to just tell you in a way that you could understand how much I absolutely love you. It'll never work. We're from different worlds. A cool species here that I really wanted to see. I mentioned on the Great American Turtle Chase how once we started getting really shut out in terms of finding turtles, once we got through the middle of Texas into West Texas, we had to kind of appreciate the scenery, but then also we started to find some different reptiles. And Kevin, being the field expert that he is, when he gets excited about a reptile that I don't know a lot about, then I get really excited about it. So one of the species that we found that was incredible was is it called a redback?
Redback
chuckwalla, which we found in Joshua Tree. I didn't know which species it was. I just knew it was a chuckwalla. It was really cool. We saw it from the road up on the rocks, and then as soon as we came up, it just scurried right into the rocks. Yep. Which is really cool, just kind of how they do that. They're right next to those outcrops that they can hide in. And that's what you have here for your redback chuckwallas.
Yeah. So for what it's worth, chuckwallas, all of the mainland chuckwallas that live on the continent of North America that are not on the islands, they're all one species at the moment, which is Sauromalus ater. Some of them used to be subdivided. There used to be Sauromalus obesus, which is sort of like the broad classification for all of them, but there's different color forms that exist in various places throughout the American Southwest. That's California, Arizona, Nevada, and Utah. And redbacks are probably the most common color form, and they exist in multiple places. And they're one of two color forms that I work with. I also have the granite chuckwallas, which mostly exist in California. And so redbacks are super cool. You can find them in Joshua Tree. You can find them in parts of California, parts of Nevada, parts of Arizona. And then there's a bunch of other color forms all within there, but technically still all considered the same species, which is interesting. And then this female just laid eggs. So this one
Just yesterday,
just overnight, really. So you can see she went in there and stuffed a bunch of sand right in under here, and she laid her eggs all the way back at the corner. And so you can see that she's like a little deflated. The male is out of view, but he's sort of behind one of the stones in the other on the back part of the enclosure. And so I pulled the eggs out last night, and they're sitting right here. If you want to take a look there. So those are the eggs. 6 nice big pearly whites. And what's really interesting is she's laid more than once in the last 6 months, which is a little surprising because that's atypical for chuckwallas. But these are 2 babies that hatched in her previous clutch. And I just pulled them out of their enclosure. Whoa, hey guys.
so they're so cool.
They're really cool little animals. Really cool little lizards. Excellent. Hey, get back in there, guys.
Wow.
Yeah, they're sweet.
We just saw her yesterday, and she was like absolutely massive. She was bulging out in all directions.
Yeah.
And then now to see her today.
Yep. It's pretty remarkable how chuckwallas, Uromastyx, I mean, most lizards, I think when they lay eggs, they look pretty deflated and pretty beat up. But some of them will just go from being like a bag of marbles to being like a complete deflated bag of garbage. You know, a bag of bones, really. These poor lizards. But they handle it so well, and they bounce back very, very quickly.
Yeah, she looks absolutely great.
Yeah,
She looks relieved. I would be too. I would be
Yeah,
too.
she's like, okay. We're good.
That's just a super cool shot.
Yeah. They're great lizards. So nice. It's crazy that she hatched only in 2024. Big girl.
Oh, less than half of.
She got that so fast.
That's it.
Good girl.
Come on back.
It's not one of the extreme smallest tortoises in the world, but this is a very small, and it really is one of the smallest tortoise species in the world. It certainly is one of the smallest for its genus, Testudo, and its species, Testudo greca. This is the Tunisian Greek tortoise, Testudo greca nabulensis, and it's a species that hasn't really been kept much. Not really a lot known about them. It's a subspecies, sorry. Interestingly, though, it did start off not only as its own subspecies, but its own genus just a few decades ago, but now it's a subspecies of the Greek tortoise, which makes sense. And they are very small. This is a full-grown adult, definitely a very mature adult. This is not this is not a young adult animal necessarily, but this is really a full adult male. And it's a species that has not really been bred yet, much like what's probably the smallest Greek tortoise, the new subspecies, the Tripolitania tortoise. So anyway, really cool to see these. Another species that enjoys a relatively arid environment, so it makes sense to be here at Arids Only, and we hope to see them bred in a lot more dense numbers in the future. But these guys seem to be doing really well here, and the future is definitely bright for them. All right, so Phil, tell me about who we've got here.
Yeah, this is old Crazy Horse Jr. He's a young adult male Uromastyx ornata, and these guys come from Egypt, Oman, and Jordan. Or I mean Egypt. Excuse me. No, I was thinking Thomas. Egypt, Israel, and Jordan, and they drift a little bit into Saudi Arabia, where they become Uromastyx ornata filbii. And this guy's the blue and orange, blue and salmon, pink colored color form example, but they exist in quite a variety of color variants. Naturally, they are polymorphic. So this guy, even though he looks this way, can produce animals that are green, that are blue, that are bicolor, that are a different shade of blue, that don't have the orange, that have more yellow. They're quite varied and quite wonderful. And he also happens to be just friendly as all hell. So can't argue with a nice, happy, friendly, ornate.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Now you mentioned they live in Egypt,
Yeah.
and I've seen some folks, zoos and even some private keepers cohabitate these with Egyptian tortoises.
Yeah.
Does that work?
You know, I don't cohab much. I mean, in fact, most of my animals are generally solo housed, but I tend to think about multiple species terrariums as being like a good thing and worth trying. I just think that I think of each enclosure kind of as like an algebraic equation. And so by adding more species, you're adding more variables. So as long as you're comfortable dealing with those different variables, and you're prepared to mitigate any problems that come as a result of those variables, then I think it's totally fine.
That's so awesome.
Yeah.
So people often ask, what are the animal species that they should work with that need more attention? Animals that have been imported a lot and haven't really gotten the respect they deserve, even though they're endangered or declining. Conyxis, the hingeback tortoises, that's their genus, Conyxis, is definitely at the top of that list. This is a genus that has been imported in droves for decades, and they really don't get a lot of respect. So our friends at the Conyxis Cooperative have been working for a long time to really focus on these species, which is terrific. The species in particular that I'm holding right now is the Speaks hingeback tortoise, or Conyxis speckii, and these animals are doing really well here. So it definitely was a tough transition when Phil was first working with them, but he's been able to really put in, and with the help of Brendan here, has been able to put in the work to really help acclimate these animals. They feel like absolute bricks in my hand right now, and they're producing. So there are 3 females. This is a female here, and this female produced 2 clutches this year, which is tremendous. This is the male. You see he's a little bit smaller. He has this beautiful yellow color. Now, there are 3 females in this group, and all 3 females have actually produced now here. So that's an incredible thing, and really something that's very promising for the future. And there's even fertile eggs as well. So can't tell you how amazing it is to be with incredible, underappreciated animals like this, but not only that, seeing them thrive and get the attention that they deserve.
So this is Uromastyx J, right?
Yes.
And that one that was just doing the little head nods, that's the male, but he's also a lavender albino. It's a T-positive albino variation, first produced by and proven by Josh Marquis. And I have this male, and then this little female is a het. And so hopefully when they're ready, these ones will produce some babies for me. And yeah, you can see, even though she is a female and they tend to be a little more drab compared to the males, it's also just illustrative of the visual difference between the two. It's quite dramatic. And this guy's not even super hot. He's not like at his best, but still is like insane looking.
And that was something interesting that I learned. I didn't realize that they really do. The color becomes more extreme when they warm up.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. It's just, it's sort of like a bearded dragons or certain geckos where they say, oh, they're fired up. I don't really like that particular terminology, but for the sake of just description, it makes sense because it's mostly when the animals are very warm, very heated, excited, kind of at their sort of peak operating efficiency and temperature. That's when they tend to look their best visually speaking. Sorry about that.
That's cool. That's all
Just
right.
don't want to lose them.
So you mentioned that you obviously have the albino, and then you have the het.
Yep.
Het stands for heterozygous, which means that she carries the gene for this same albinism trait, but she doesn't show it outwardly the way that he does, which means if they are paired together, a percentage of babies will show that trait outwardly.
Yes, sir.
And some others will be hets like the mom.
That is exactly right. Yes. So in theory, the general average is, I think it's either 50 or 75% when you're breeding visual to het is like sort of the average statistic. But that's more of a per egg chance than it is
Right.
like total, right? This is
Exactly.
something very, very common. People make mistakes around the percentages in terms of genetic inheritance, but it's also imperfect. We know that a lot now just through just sort of various explorations into genetics and how they work. So it's not like a perfect one-to-one. Technically, you could breed these two together, and quite literally every single baby could be normal, like visually normal, or they could technically every one of them could be visually albino.
Right. That's a great point to make.
But it doesn't. But generally speaking, it doesn't pan out to be that way. Usually, you're going to see on average 75% of the offspring going to be the visual, and then 25% of them will be hets.
Right. And those would be 100% hets.
100% hets.
And sometimes you'll see people talk about 66% hets
Yep.
or what have you, but that's usually when you're going
Het to het.
het to het and
Yep.
there's not a visual
And then
involved.
the 50% possible het is when you've bred a het to a normal. So then all of
Right.
those babies resulting have a 50% chance of being a het.
But none of them will have the
That's right.
the visual.
That's correct.
Punnett square stuff,
Whoa.
sophomore biology.
That's true. Whoa, guys.
Cool. All right. So Phil, I'm so excited to be here with you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to come and check things out. This is not how things normally look. This is not the normal operation, right? You're right in the middle of moving your
Yeah.
entire collection.
Yep.
And that's not easy.
Yeah, no, it's not easy at all. This is the third time I've had to move the whole thing, and it's such a brutal, heavy lift to do it. But each time I've learned something and changed things and made adjustments that benefit both me and the animals. And I'm happy that it's basically over now. Now it's mostly just like pruning and cord management and setting things up as they should be. But yeah, I'm glad that the heavy lifting is done.
Yeah. And it's kind of like a perfect time. But I'm so excited to be here to kind of have like this exclusive look at the work that you do and see the amazing animals that you breed here. But also the timing is such that like there's also this secondary message, which is like, the difficulties of moving and everything that goes into that. There are certain things in here that are kind of in a state of flux or they've moved and they're set up, but there's still like changes that need to be made to the setup. And you're kind of in the middle of all that right now.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So my main priority was getting it because of the timing of my move. It timed basically right with the start of the season. And so the sooner I got all the animals in place and under a heat lamp, the better it would. Hopefully the idea is that it'll have the smallest impact on the season itself going forward. But it's also just easier for the animals. Like even if I wasn't moving in season, I don't want them in boxes very long, Right. So a lot of the cages right now are set up sort of in a very extremely minimalist fashion, but it's just to make sure that the animals have their heat, their UV, and a hiding place. And then over the coming days, I'll add furnishings and build out their enclosures a little more substantially. Some of them, like these here and this San Esteban iguana cage and a few others, they're actually like set up in full and probably won't really see any adjustment outside of minor stuff. But then there's others with, like some of these other surrounding enclosures, which might almost be bare completely. But it was just to get the animals in place so that way they're under the least amount of stress possible during that move. Yeah.
And obviously, my focus is turtles and tortoises. Your focus is mostly Uromastyx, but other lizards and things. On our end, and we kind of talked about this a little bit yesterday when we were hanging out, like stress is such a huge factor. And there are underlying things that can be exacerbated by stress.
Yep.
And they come out and then, rough things happen.
Yeah.
Moves can be so hard. Like, are you anticipating that? Obviously, I'd assume
Yeah.
you'd be worried about that and everything.
Yeah, well, so with the Uromastyx in particular, I tend to get worried about moving them, especially around the season, around breeding season, because generally speaking, my experience has been, and other people have corroborated this, and it's something I kind of put out often, is that let's say you move an animal and it's like a shipping move. They move from one state to another. Oftentimes, those animals need a full year of cycling in that new space before they can breed effectively. Right. So they may mate, they may lay eggs, but the eggs won't hatch. This is very, 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 very common. And the way it usually goes is people will kind of deny what I'm trying to say. They'll get the animals together, they'll see mating, female will grow, she'll get gravid, she'll lay her eggs, all that tends to go fine. But then they call me and they say, wait a minute, the eggs, they're all dying one by one by one. And so that first 2-3 weeks in incubation, they just drop off. And that's where, and my kind of working theory is that that's just a result of too high of a baseline of stress.
Yeah.
So in my case, in this particular instance, the move was a 4-minute move. It's like the house that we got is 4 minutes from the shop that I used to run, and it was just it's like a little jaunt over, and it's into the same enclosure with the same furnishings that smell like them.
Right.
So I don't think it's going to be as big of an impact. Right. Additionally, I moved them before mating, so I would have been much more concerned about moving the animals after they'd mated and then have them laying eggs here. That would have been probably a much bigger problem than getting them here in advance of copulation and developing their eggs and laying them, which I'm hoping won't be a big impact, but it would also be okay. Like I'm not all that worried about them having too negative a season. Like, cause even if things go totally south this year, I'll still get some eggs. I'll still get some eggs that do well and some babies that hatch. And so that's fine because part of the move was intended to sort of reduce the pressure on the animals, reduce the total number of animals in that I'm breeding and keeping in order to, try to put quality over quantity, in the space that I was in previously. The financial demands on the space were such that it was pushing me to put quantity over quality. Not that, and just to be clear, it doesn't mean I was ever compromising the animal well-being or anything like that. It was pushing me to just grow. Right. And that's not really what I'm after long-term, I think, I mean, obviously I have my projects and things I want to perpetuate into the future for as long as I can. And I want to contribute to herpetoculture, but I don't think that has to be done by way of hundreds and hundreds of produced every year. So I'm not as worried about a negative impact on the season this go around.
That's such a great call. Phil, you're really living the American reptile lover's dream, the American dream for us weird people that kind of have
this disease.
This disease really, well said. And you're supporting your family with the animals that you love. Mm-hmm. But what people don't realize is when that happens on any level, it puts a ton of pressure on you to deliver.
Yeah.
And now this thing that you do as a pastime that you love, that's your favorite thing in the world, now becomes something that has a lot of pressure attached to it.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times people don't really realize how much pressure goes into breeding reptiles, especially when you take that turn from it being a hobby and into it being your livelihood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. It's a unique one. So I've kind of gone in both directions here, like previously I was working out of my family home and that was fun and it was great, but it had limitations in terms of what I was able to do at that time in the space. And then when I moved into my shop space, the warehouse, it was different. And I felt there was like a sense of liberation and a sense of like, oh, I can really grow here and I can build out. But then the building out part of it, even though that was fun and I could have stayed there and pushed the envelope and gone bigger and grown in a way that was more substantial. And I do still have desires to grow in a way. It's no longer meant to be the kind of growth that it's less industrial, I guess you could say. And I don't want to use industrial in I'm not talking about like industrial farming or anything like that. I just mean that, when you think about when you're making the trade-offs that you have to make with regard to scale, then you have to make cost trade-offs, you make time trade-offs. And those weren't really those particular things weren't necessarily in line with my core values as a herpetoculturist. Yeah. And so making that change in the other direction, and a lot of it also is financially related. Like I don't have to spend as much money here. This is, I'm not paying lodging in two different places, it's paying lodging in one place. So that all of those things just reduce the pressure on me, reduce the pressure on the animals. And I've been talking for a long time, I've got my Patreon, I've got my podcast. So much more of my efforts are over the last several years have been pushed towards education and like consulting and getting more informational content out into the world because the main goal is to raise the baseline level of care for the animals that I work with, as well as, propagate them to some degree. But now being able to kind of pull back on that and not make the propagation side of it the big part. Yep. And I don't know that I would have done that without having gone in the other direction for a little while.
Correct.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
You tried it, and there's pros and cons to all of it, but you tried it and that there's more here than there was with more there.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, totally. That makes perfect. And that's exactly right. The idea is that I'm still going to produce a good number of animals, but now it's going to be much more focused, much more organized and like streamlined in a way. My shop space, as great as it was and as much utility as it had, certainly had downsides, which I could get into in another conversation. But there were a lot of downsides there that I was having to kind of fight uphill against. Yeah. And so now I'm actually in some ways kind of coming back to my roots, because this is sort of how I started. Yeah. Things are more the way I developed as a herpetoculturist are more related to the way things are now than the way they were in my warehouse space. Right. So
you're back to the roots of why you love it and why you fell in love with it. Yeah. And then also working to make the community that we're a part of a better place to be.
Yes.
By giving back more, because you're not worried about as many animals.
Yep. Yeah. And I can give them totally. And it's just such a cool thing, because it's allowing me to go back to having a lot of fun. Right. Whereas when it's a separate space, I had worries that, like if something laid eggs in the middle of the night, I had to drive over there. If like I had a power outage in the middle of the night, I had to drive over there in a snowstorm, you name it, like all kinds of weird downsides that come as a result of that. And there's much more security here. There's much more ability and again, the fun part I think is a huge factor here, because even though it was fun doing it in that space, there was an element of fun and freedom there. It's not the same as when, because in here I'm not having to fight as many uphill battles. Mm-hmm. So it just pulls all these stressors out of the equation and allows me to just enjoy it again in a way that I haven't been able to for probably 5-6 years.
That's awesome. I'm so excited for you, and just excited to be here and be a small part of it for these last couple days.
Yeah, it's been awesome and helpful. Thank you. Appreciate you, man.
So right now we're looking at a baby Moroccan Uromastyx, Uromastyx nigriventris. This one was possibly from a parthenogenetic clutch, according to Phil, because the female did produce a clutch earlier this last year, and this was the second clutch. This was the only surviving baby from that clutch, and it's growing really slow. We're not entirely sure why, but it's a cute little thing. You can see how tiny it is, and they're one of the larger Uromastyx. Not quite as big as a Egyptian Uromastyx, but they get bigger than like ornate Uromastyx and Uromastyx jri.
Hit subscribe, join the crew. Just Turtles. There's always something new.